Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. No alarm, no notifications, no feed waiting for you. You reach for your phone, the way you always do, and for a second, your hand just hovers there because something is different. You made a decision last night, a simple one, maybe even a stupid one, or so your brain is already telling you. You decided to stop. No YouTube, no Instagram, no TikTok, no news, no podcasts, no Netflix, nothing. Just 30 days. And right now, in this moment, before you've even gotten out of bed, you already feel it. A pull, a discomfort, a quiet anxiety you can't quite name. What I do now, here's what nobody tells you about that feeling. That discomfort you're feeling in the first 10 seconds of your morning, that's not boredom. That's withdrawal. And what happens over the next 30 days to your mind, your identity, your focus, your relationships, your ambition, is something that will genuinely change how you see every single hour of your life going forward. Stay with me, because this is going to get uncomfortable before it gets powerful. Let's start with what you believe right now. You believe you're in control of what you consume. You believe you choose what to watch, what to read, what to scroll through. You believe that your phone is a tool, something you pick up and put down whenever you want. You believe that your attention belongs to you. You're wrong. And I don't say that to be dramatic. I say that because the evidence is overwhelming. The mechanism is documented. And once you understand what's actually happening inside your brain every time you open an app, you will never look at your screen the same way again. Here's a question most people never ask themselves. When was the last time you sat in a room, completely alone, with no screen, no music, no podcast, just your own thoughts, and felt completely fine, not restless, not anxious, not reaching for something, just fine? If you're struggling to remember, that tells you something. Because 10 years ago, that was normal. That was just called Tuesday afternoon. Now it feels like a challenge, a discipline, something monks do. And here's what's wild. You didn't choose this. Nobody sat you down and said, hey, from now on, silence is going to feel unbearable. It happens slowly, quietly, one notification at a time, one autoplay at a time, one infinite scroll at a time. You think you developed a habit. What you actually developed was a dependency. And the difference between those two things is everything. A habit is something you do. A dependency is something that does you. But here's the part that most people never reach, because most people stop here, nod their heads, feel vaguely guilty, and then immediately open Instagram to post about how they need a digital detox. The real question isn't, am I addicted to my phone? The real question is, what has this dependency already cost me? And what does my mind actually look like underneath all of this noise? Because here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. Your mind, your real mind, the one that exists underneath the content, underneath the feed, underneath the constant input, you haven't met it in a very long time. And what happens when you finally do? That's what this is about. To understand what 30 days of silence does to your brain, you first need to understand what 30 days of constant consumption has already done to it. And this is where it gets dark. Every platform you use, every single one, was engineered by teams of the most talented behavioral psychologists, neuroscientists, and UX designers on the planet. Their job was not to make your life better. Their job was one thing and one thing only. Keep your eyes on the screen as long as possible. That's it. That's the whole mission. And the way they do it is by hijacking the most powerful reward system in the human brain, the dopamine loop. Now, you've probably heard the word dopamine thrown around a lot. People talk about it like it's the pleasure chemical. Your brain releases it when something good happens and you feel happy. But that's not quite right. And the difference between what dopamine actually does and what most people think it does, that difference is a key to understanding why you feel the way you feel. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It doesn't fire when you get the reward. It fires when you expect you might get the reward. Read that again. Your brain floods with dopamine not when you find something interesting, but in the moment before you find out whether something is interesting. That microsecond between scrolling and seeing what comes next, that's a dopamine hit. Every single time. And here's where the engineers got genuinely clever. and genuinely dangerous. The most powerful dopamine triggers are not guaranteed rewards. They're variable rewards, unpredictable ones. This is the exact same psychological mechanism behind slot machines. You don't keep pulling the lever because you always win. You keep pulling because you might win. And your Instagram feed, your TikTok feed, your YouTube homepage, they are all slot machines. Sometimes you scroll and find something amazing. Sometimes it's garbage. Sometimes it's something that makes you laugh. Sometimes something that makes you angry. Sometimes something that makes you feel connected. Sometimes something that makes you feel terrible about yourself. You never know which one is coming. And that unpredictability, that variability, is what makes it impossible to stop, because your brain is not looking for satisfaction. Your brain is looking for the next hit of anticipation. And the platforms know this. They don't just know it. They measure it. They A/B test it. They optimize every pixel, every notification timing, every autoplay delay, specifically to maximize the number of times they can trigger that anticipatory dopamine spike in a single session. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented. This is their job description. And here's the part nobody talks about. After years of this, after thousands and thousands of these microdopamine hits every single day, your brain begins to change. Structurally, functionally, the very architecture of how you think, focus, and feel begins to rewire itself around this pattern. And when you take it away, that's when things get really interesting. Day one without content feels manageable. You're running on the momentum of your decision. There's a novelty to it. You feel almost proud of yourself. And then the evening hits. The time you'd normally spend watching something, scrolling something, listening to something. That time suddenly exists as a void. And your brain doesn't know what to do with a void. So it panics. Quietly but unmistakably. You'll feel a restlessness that has no obvious source. An irritability. A strange low-grade anxiety that floats just beneath the surface. You might convince yourself you're just bored. That this is just boredom. But it's not boredom. Boredom is when there's nothing interesting available. What you're feeling is something different. What you're feeling is your brain screaming for a stimulus it has been trained to expect and not getting it. This is neurological withdrawal, and it is real. Day two is usually harder than day one. The novelty of the decision wears off. The discomfort intensifies. You'll find yourself reaching for your phone automatically before your conscious mind even registers what you're doing. Your hand will be moving toward the screen before a single thought forms. That automation, that reflexive reaching, is one of the most revealing things you'll witness about yourself in this entire process, because it shows you that a significant portion of your screen use was never a conscious choice to begin with. It was just your body doing what it was trained to do. Day three is typically the peak of the discomfort. Sleep might be disrupted. Concentration feels almost impossible. Simple tasks feel strangely hard. Your mind will keep generating reasons why this experiment is stupid, unnecessary, extreme. You're not addicted. You're just connected. Everyone uses their phone. This is the modern world. You're being ridiculous. That voice in your head, that's not logic. That's a trained dependency trying to protect itself. Push through day three. Because what happens next is extraordinary. Somewhere between day 4 and day 7, something shifts. The withdrawal softens. The anxiety doesn't disappear, but it changes texture. It becomes less frantic. And in that space, that quieter, stranger space, something starts to surface. Thoughts. Your own thoughts. Real ones. Long ones. Thoughts that follow a thread instead of jumping every 3 seconds. Thoughts that go somewhere. This might sound unremarkable, but if you actually do this, you'll be stunned by how foreign it feels. Because here's what constant content consumption does to your thinking that nobody warns you about. It steals your processing time. Your brain is not just a receiver. It's a processor. Everything you experience, every emotion, every interaction, every problem, every ambition, needs processing time to be properly integrated. And processing happens in the quiet, in the gaps, in the moments of nothing. But when you fill every gap, every commute, every meal, every moment between tasks, every minute before sleep, with content, you eliminate the processing time completely. You are essentially trying to run a computer that never gets to defragment. It slows down. It gets cluttered. It starts dropping things. And when you finally give it silence, even just a few days of it, it begins to process at speed. Old memories surface. Emotions you buried under months of distraction come up for air. Ideas you forgot you would start returning. Creative connections your brain had been trying to make, but never had the quiet to complete, suddenly click into place. This is not metaphorical. This is a default mode network activating properly. The part of your brain responsible for self-reflection, imagination, long-term planning, and meaning-making. It literally cannot function optimally when you're constantly feeding it external input. Give it silence, and it wakes up. Here's where it gets psychologically intense. And this is the phase that most people who try to digital detox don't talk about, because it's uncomfortable in a way that's hard to explain. Somewhere in the second week, you start to encounter a question, not a dramatic question, not a philosophical crisis, just a quiet, persistent, slightly unsettling question that keeps surfacing in the silence. Who am I when I'm not consuming anything? Because here's something nobody wants to admit. A massive portion of modern identity is constructed through consumption. What you watch tells you who you are. What content you follow tells you what you believe. The creators you love, the communities you belong to online, the aesthetic of your feed, these have become identity anchors. When the content stops, those anchors lift. And for many people, what's left feels surprisingly thin. Not empty, not meaningless, but thinner than expected. If I'm not someone who watches this show, listens to this podcast, follows this community, then who am I in the silence? This is not a crisis. This is actually the most important question you will ever sit with. Because the answer, the real answer, only comes from within. It cannot be consumed. It cannot be scrolled to. And the fact that the question feels difficult, that tells you exactly how much of your sense of self has been outsourced to external input. But there's something else that happens in week 2. Your memory gets sharper. Not dramatically, not overnight, but conversations start sticking more. You remember what you did 3 days ago with more clarity. Details that would normally slide off your mind begin to grip, because your working memory, the brain's mental scratch pad, has been freed up. When you're consuming hours of content daily, your working memory is constantly being written over. New information floods in before old information can consolidate. It's like trying to write on a whiteboard while someone keeps erasing it. In silence, the erasing slows down, and what was written starts to stay. This is the phase that changes people. By the midpoint of the 30 days, something neurological is genuinely happening. Your brain is beginning to recalibrate its baseline dopamine sensitivity. Here's what that means in plain language. After years of constant high stimulation input, your dopamine receptors have downregulated. They become less sensitive to normal stimulation. This is the same mechanism that happens with any repeated overstimulation. The brain compensates by requiring more input to produce the same response, which is why real life starts to feel boring. Why conversations feel unstimulating compared to a perfectly edited video. Why sitting with a book feels slow compared to a scrollable feed. Why a walk in the park feels underwhelming compared to 40 tabs of content. Your brain has been recalibrated to a stimulation threshold that ordinary life cannot meet. And in weeks 2 and 3 of silence, something remarkable begins to happen. The threshold drops back down. Slowly, incrementally, but genuinely. Things start to become interesting again. The texture of a conversation, the slow build of a long thought, the satisfaction of finishing a task without checking anything, the strange pleasure of just sitting somewhere and watching the world move. These things which should feel ordinary start to feel almost electric, not because you become enlightened, but because your brain has remembered how to receive them. This is a rewire, and it only happens in the silence. But here's the problem. And this is the part that changes everything about how you approach the second half of this experiment. Everything I just described, the clarity, the memory, the recalibration, all of that is real. But there's a shadow side to the rewire that almost nobody talks about. Because while your brain is detoxing from overstimulation, while it's finding its baseline again, it's also doing something else. It's showing you what you've been avoiding. This is the part people don't prepare for. C. Content consumption is not just entertainment. For most people, it's also a coping mechanism. Every anxiety you don't want to sit with, content fills the gap. Every ambition you're afraid to pursue, content gives you a sense of progress without risk. Every relationship that's drifted, content replaces the social stimulation. Every question about your life that you're not ready to answer, content keeps it buried. When the content stops, all of that surfaces. And depending on how long you've been consuming at this level and what you've been using it to avoid, this can feel like standing in a room that's suddenly very bright. You'll see things about yourself you weren't ready to see. Patterns, avoidances, fears you forgot you had. And here's the critical thing. This is not a problem with the process. This is a process. Because the clarity that comes from 30 days of silence isn't just mental sharpness or better focus. The real clarity is self-clarity. The thing you've been running from, the question you've been burying, it's going to be standing there in week 3, patient as stone. And for the first time in years, you'll have no choice but to face it. Some people find that terrifying. Some people find it the most freeing thing they've ever experienced. Most people find it both. But here's what nobody tells you about weeks 3 and 4. This is where the real power is. If you make it to day 22, and most people don't, which is exactly why most people never know what's on the other side, something changes that is very difficult to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. The best word for it is authorship. You start to feel like the author of your own attention. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. When a thought comes, you can follow it somewhere. When a problem needs solving, you can sit with it instead of escaping it. When a conversation happens, you're actually in it, not half present while some part of your brain keeps reaching for a screen. Your creative output, whatever form that takes for you, starts to change. Ideas become more original, less derivative, less like remixes of things you consumed, and more like things that come from somewhere genuinely internal. This is not mystical. This is what happens when your brain is no longer in a constant state of input processing. It switches from receive mode to generate mode. And generate mode is where everything you actually want to build, create, become, that's where all of it lives. Here's another thing that happens in the final week that most people report, but few explain. Time expands. Not literally, but subjectively, genuinely. Days start to feel longer, fuller, more like they actually happened. And this makes complete sense once you understand the neuroscience of time perception. Your brain marks time through novel experiences and memories. When every day is a blur of content, when Monday and Thursday look identical in your memory, time collapses, months disappear, years vanish. But when you're present, when you're actually living in each hour instead of consuming your way through it, your brain lays down more memory markers. And more markers means more perceived time. 30 days of this can feel, in memory, like 3 months lived in full. Now, here's the critical question. What do you do on day 31? Because this is where most people fail the entire experiment. They reach day 30, feel incredible, and then slowly, over the next 2 weeks, slide right back into exactly where they started. And they wonder why the clarity fades. The answer is this. 30 days is not a reset button you press, and then go back to normal. 30 days is a demonstration, a proof of concept. It shows you what your mind is capable of when it's not under constant siege. The goal was never permanent abstinence. The goal was to see clearly, undeniably, in your own lived experience, what the noise has been costing you, and armed with that knowledge, to build a relationship with content that you control, instead of one that controls you. That looks different for everyone. For some people, it means consuming content in defined windows. 1 hour in the evening, intentionally chosen, then closed. For some people, it means eliminating certain platforms entirely and keeping others on strict terms. For some people, it means a weekly silence day, one day where the feed goes dark and the brain gets space. The specific structure matters less than the principle behind it. You are the architect of your attention, not the algorithm, not the platform, not the habit. You. But here's the problem with that principle. And this is what I need you to hear before we get to the end of this. Knowing all of this is not enough. I need to say that directly. You can understand everything I've just explained: the dopamine loops, the withdrawal phases, the rewire, the emergence. You can understand all of it intellectually, nod along, feel genuinely moved, and then pick up your phone the moment this video ends and scroll for 45 minutes. Because knowledge and behavior are not the same thing. And the gap between them, that gap is exactly where the platforms live. They are not afraid of you knowing this. They are counting on the gap, because the gap is maintained by something deeper than ignorance. It's maintained by comfort. The comfort of the familiar, the comfort of the noise, the comfort of never having to sit in a room with just yourself and your unfiltered thoughts. And here's the hardest truth of this entire video. The discomfort of the first 3 days is not the price of a digital detox. The discomfort of the first 3 days is the price of meeting yourself, of finding out who you actually are underneath the constant curation, underneath the identity you've built from consumed content, underneath the anxiety you've kept buried under an infinite scroll. Most people will never pay that price, not because they can't, because they never decide to. And that decision, that single moment of "I'm going to do this," is the most important variable in everything I've described today. Not the science, not the phases, not the mechanism, the decision. So here's where I leave you. Not with a challenge, not with a homework assignment, not with a 30-day plan, just with a question. The same question that will surface in week 2 if you ever go quiet enough to hear it. Who are you when you're not consuming anything? Because the answer to that question, the real answer, not the one you perform online, not the one built from the content you consume, not the one assembled from other people's ideas and aesthetics and beliefs. The real answer is waiting for you in the silence, and it always has been. The only question is whether you're willing to go find it.